Welcome back, everybody. This is Days of Noah number 55, and today we're going to be looking at NASA and Freemasonry because, as you're going to see, they run together hand in hand. Now, there is an inordinate number of NASA astronauts who are admitted Freemasons. This includes John Glenn, the two-time U.S. Senator. It also includes Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon. He was a 33rd degree Freemason. Edgar Mitchell was another moonwalker aboard the Apollo 14, and he is in the Order of the Demolay Masons. James Irwin of Apollo 15, the last man to walk on the moon, is also a Mason. Don Easel, Gordon Cooper, who is on the Mercury and Gemini missions, is a Mason. Virgil Grissom, Walter Schirra, Thomas Stafford, Paul Weitz, and many others. Neil Armstrong, Alan Shepard, William Pogue, Vance Brand, and so on and so forth. So the amount of astronauts known to be Freemasons, or at least from Masonic families, is pretty astonishing. And it's likely that there's more astronauts and people of key importance within NASA who are affiliated with the great craft, the Brotherhood of the Masons. I'm sure there are a lot of them that we don't even know about. For there to be so many Masons within NASA, which is the Masonic religion is one of the world's largest and oldest secret societies. It's obviously involved with space exploration. The fact that there's so many Masons within NASA should raise some serious suspicion. So there is an article from the Scottish Rite magazine. See, the Masons have their own magazines. Of all things, they call it the New Age, because that's what they're into. They are an occult Luciferian society that's trying to propagate the age of Aquarius, or the Saturnian age, the age of Horus, that Aleister Crowley pretty much put on the map 100 years ago when he dictated the Book of the Law. When it was demonically inspired to write that book, he talked about the age of Horus, the eon of Horus, and that this would birth a new eon, or a new age. So most New Age practitioners today, if they've done their history, will find that their faith drives back to Crowley. But so the Scottish Rite magazine, called the New Age, we see a copy of it over here on the right, December 1969 issue, discusses how Neil Armstrong and brother Buzz Aldrin's historic Apollo 11 walk on the moon 40 years ago. There's a lot of deep occultism within Apollo. We'll look at that in a minute. Also, 11 is a power number in the occult. Aldrin is a Scottish Rite Freemason, and it turns out that he took a handmade silk flag to the moon and back, and then donated it to the House of the Temple. We'll look at that momentarily. So the entire Apollo program is rife with Masons, and they're proud of it, and they're not shy about advertising it. In this 1969 edition of the New Age magazine, there is an extensive article written by Kenneth Kleinknecht, 33rd degree Scottish Rite Freemason of the Southern Jurisdiction, and by the way, he's the manager of the Apollo program command and service modules for NASA. He also helped run the Gemini and Project Mercury missions. And so here is a picture of Brother Kleinknecht. He happens to be a high-level Freemason, and he happens to be a head of the Apollo missions. Now, when you look at the cover of the New Age magazine, you see your classic double-headed eagle on the front. We've looked at that in the past. That's really a double-headed phoenix. The double-headed phoenix is one of the most ancient occult symbols. It goes all the way back to the land of Phoenicia and the Babylonians. It represents the religious, the god kings. That is a representation of the Nephilim, the divine, mighty bloodline that existed before the flood that God destroyed. That's in line with the seed of the serpent mentioned in the Bible. Now, it's not a coincidence that we see the two pillars, by the way, Jachin and Boaz, which in previous lectures we have conclusively revealed was built by King Hiram's first-hand Freemason, Hiram Abiff, and that those were really the pillars dedicated and consecrated to the wind and the fire. Those are the specific pillars of Hercules. And later we see the Royal Arch, the Masonic Royal Arch that's attached to those pillars. And unfortunately, that paganism got included in King Solomon's temple. That's a whole nother discussion that we've already done in the past. But we see here that the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree Freemasonry, and of course they have to have the pyramid because they are engrossed in Egyptology, all of the ancient mystery religions, and the pyramid also represents the Saturnian Lodge and the Brotherhood of Saturn. We also see a picture of the Sphinx on the front. Now, everybody's heard of the riddle of the Sphinx. Mankind has been trying to figure out why there's a great big giant lion's body with a man's head on it sitting out in front of the Pyramid of Giza. And the answer is because that represents the genetic chimeras that existed before the flood. Back in a time when the fallen angels were mixing the DNA of men with the DNA of animals, such as the Minotaur, etc. So this magazine is an occult writing. Now on page 13, in the November 1969 edition, Brother Kleinknecht, 33rd degree Freemason, who is running the Apollo mission, has this to say. Note how many of the astronauts themselves are Brother Masons. Edwin Aldrin, Cooper, Eisel, Shearer, Stafford, Mitchell, Weitz. Before his tragic death in a flash fire at Cape Kennedy in January 27, 1967, Virgil Gus Grissom was a Mason too. Astronaut Gordon Cooper, during his epochal Gemini 5 space flight in 1965, carried with him an official 33rd degree jewel and a Scottish Rite flag. Via the lunar plaque, the Masonic insignia and flag, and the Masonic astronauts themselves, Masonry already is in the space age. See there? Masonry and the space age are one and the same. Can we doubt that Freemasonry and its spiritual relevance to the modern era, when even its material representatives have today made historic inroads into the infinite expanses of outer space? That's very interesting because, as we've said in the past, the great delusion of 2 Thessalonians 2, the one that Paul talks about that's going to come with the supernatural working of Satan with all signs, miracles, and false wonders, so that if possible could even deceive the very elect. We've revealed in previous lectures that that is the big reveal of the extraterrestrials and the hybrid children and the New Age Nephilim that are nothing more than a demonic and fallen angelic scheme where they're masquerading as aliens. And so is it any wonder that NASA has been completely overcome with this secret society? Now, Freemasonry, they're not shy about admitting that the craft, as they refer to it, has always been a spiritual endeavor, one that is to lead mankind to salvation through the cosmic light. In fact, Kleinknecht himself writes that the mission of the craft has always been one of salvation, but until now its field of endeavor was the individual and bringing him to the light. This is the cosmic light, the Christ consciousness. That's what the New Age is all about. It's not about a person. It's not about the Son of God, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, but it's about a concept, this collective Christ consciousness where we can all evolve to a higher spiritual level and become enlightened like Christ. He goes on to say that Masonry cannot think in these terms now. All men everywhere must hear our message, or all men everywhere will perish. By the way, witchcraft, which is a close association with the Masonic religion, they both use the 6-pointed star inside of a circle to perform rituals, that's called a hexagram. Witchcraft also refers to its religion as the craft, because it's a close cousin with the Masonic craft. So when you begin to look and see who's responsible for running this 33rd Degree New Age magazine, we find out that it's a British magazine back in the turn of the century, inspired by the Fabian Society. That's right. This is a group of socialists, Marxists, and communists. They are credited as the major influence on European literature and the arts throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s. They're solely based on New Age mysticism, the occult, and Masonic principles. The organization's official coat of arms are two, and you see them over here on the right. One of them is a wolf hiding in sheep's clothing. Think about that. F and S stands for the Fabian Society. It also stands for the Fraternity of the Brotherhood of Saturn. And what do you see? You see a wolf who's hiding in sheep's clothing. I think Jesus had something to say about that the seed of the serpent, that the Pharisees and the Sadducees were really wolves hiding in sheep's clothes. The other symbol for the Fabian Society is this one here. When I strike hard. It's the tortoise. This means incrementalism. They don't make any big, fast, sudden moves. They just slowly erode Christian principles, Western values, the American Constitution, until one day you've turned into something else. This is who is propagating the New World Order today, the same group of people. Famous members like George Bernard Shaw, who is a political activist who started the London School of Economics. He's also a known eugenicist and depopulationist and a Marxist. And then you got guys like H.G. Wells, who was also a deep occultist. He was a writer, an evolutionist, and a futurist. The reason that he knew so much about the future is because he had a spirit of divination working through him, which is in light of the fact that he was so deep into mysticism and the occult. He would go on to write many prophetic stories such as The Time Machine, The War of the Worlds, where aliens come down and conquer mankind, The Island of Dr. Moreau, where there's genetic chimeras being formed between human beings and animals, The First Men on the Moon, which, by the way, is full of an insectoid group of groups of insectoids called selenites that take over the planet. And then, of course, the famous Modern Utopia, which describes this dystopian future where a new world order system will be put in place. These are the people who are part of the Masonic Society who started the New Age magazine. We also see guys like Bertrand Russell and famous theosophist and occultist Annie Besant. Annie Besant is the one who channeled the famous world prayer, the mantra that talks about inviting the cosmic light into the world. And she's channeled and published over 30 different books, some of them such as The Evolution of the Occult, Esoteric Christianity, which is based on Gnosticism, Reincarnation and a Study of Karma, The Perfecting of Man so that he can receive the Christ consciousness through the Kundalini spirit and the Kundalini awakening. That is a false spirit. That's a counterfeit of the Holy Spirit. She goes on to write books called The Brotherhood of Religion. This is about the Eastern Star, which is the Masonic religion for women. We have The Path of Initiation, Occult Chemistry, and Clairvoyance. So these are the people who are publishing these magazines that we see here. They're the ones who are into all the occult mysticism. And so that's why we see this magazine here with Brother Aldrin standing on the moon. So while Brother Aldrin was on the moon, he claimed the moon for the Masonic jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge of Texas. That means, according to the Masons, the moon belongs to them. Aldrin was a member of the Clear Lake Lodge 1417 in Texas when he stepped onto the surface of the moon. he carried a special deputation from the Grand Master to claim the moon as being in the territorial jurisdiction of the Grand Lodge of Texas. In the wake of Aldrin's Masonic space mission, the Grand Lodge of Texas formed the Tranquility Lodge number 2000, named after the Tranquility Base, which is the location of the Apollo 11 landing. So, Buzz Aldrin flew to the moon. He landed there. We know on the dark side of the moon they also have a crater named after Jack Parsons, who is Aleister Crowley's protege. It's called the Parsons Crater. Buzz Aldrin took a flag of the Masonic symbol, and he staked a claim. When you stake a claim, that goes back to the old days. That's when you would put a standard or a symbol into the ground, and that was a signia that was your land. So Buzz Aldrin staked a claim on the moon saying that it belongs to the secret societies. And then they went ahead and started a lodge called the Lodge of Tranquility, based on the fact of where the Apollo 11 mission was, the Sea of Tranquility. Now, according to the Tranquility Lodge official website, on July 20th, 1969, 2 American astronauts landed on the moon of the planet Earth in an area known as Mare Tranquillitatis, also translated as the Sea of Tranquility. One of those brave men was Brother Edwin Buzz Aldrin Jr., a member of the Clear Lodge. Brother Aldrin carried with him special deputation from the Grand Master Guy Smith, constituting and appointing Brother Aldrin as a special deputy of the Grand Master, granting unto him full power in the premises to represent the Grand Master as such, and authorize him to claim Masonic territorial jurisdiction for the most worshipful Grand Lodge of Texas. And they directed him to make due return of his acts. And Brother Aldrin certified that the special deputation was carried by him to the moon. So, this is one of the symbols that they have in this Lodge of Tranquility. It has the classic compass in the square. This is the Masonic apron. And we see this is the lodge. It shows Texas, and it shows a picture of the moon. So if you didn't know that the Masons own the moon, now you know. The secret powers and the secret Masonic religion have made an official jurisdiction where they now claim that they own the moon. Of course, that's not public knowledge. You have to dig to find it. But in the secret cabal, they're all well aware of this. And you have to consider the significance of that. I mean, the moon is it's a powerful astronomical body. You know, it affects a lot of things here on planet Earth. It affects the tides. It affects different aspects of our lunar calendar. We know that the full moon is when the crazies come out at night. We know that the Satanists and the Luciferians like to do their work during the full moon, the witching hour. So this has occult significance that the Masons have made a legal claim for the moon, at least according to their legality, not mine. I could care less if Brother Aldrin carried a Masonic flag up to the moon and stuck it in the dirt. That has no significance to me, and I don't acknowledge the Masonic religion as being some specific organization or great body of people that I have to acknowledge what their jurisdiction is. But according to them, that's what they believe. They believe that they have legal rights and access to the moon. So you can't make this stuff up. If you do enough research and you put the dots together, you can only come to one conclusion. The Masons own NASA. They own space exploration. They're the ones driving the mission. They're the ones writing the narrative. And they are a secret cabal of people running the planet. And so we have to ask, what is their agenda with space exploration? I think as the lecture continues to unfold, it'll be quite clear. Here is an image in the New Age magazine of Sovereign Grand Commander Guy Smith presenting the Masonic flag to Brother Aldrin, which he's going to take to the moon. The Supreme Council of the Southern Jurisdiction. What do you see on the front? The double-headed phoenix. The double-headed phoenix goes all the way back to the ancient stonemasons and Nephilim hybrids who represent the divine bloodlines before and after the flood. See, if you study people like Albert Pike, a Civil War general who was a 33rd degree Freemason, he wrote books like The Morals of Dogma. It has the double-headed phoenix. It also shows the royal crown above it because that is a royal bloodline symbol. And then, of course, above that is the pyramid with the all-seeing eye like we see on the dollar bill with the rays of illumination, because these are the enlightened ones. This is the Illuminati. This is the mystery religions. And so this is what was taken to the moon to stake a claim for the Masonic religion. Edwin Buzz Aldrin took the Masonic flag in 1969. He conducted a secret ritual. All of the numbers have meaning. The word Apollo has a meaning. 11 has a meaning. 1969 has to do with the age of Aquarius. They performed a Masonic Luciferian ritual while on the moon, dedicating that to Lucifer. At the time, he was a 32nd degree Masonic initiate, and he planted on the moon surface the real flag intended for honor, the flag that the Apollo 11 had carried in its storage compartment that has deep and mysterious spirituality with the double-headed eagle. And don't let anybody fool you with this double-headed eagle. There is no such thing as a double-headed eagle. We've done lectures in the past. I forget where they are exactly in the Days of Noah series, but we have several hour lectures just looking at the double-headed phoenix. They shrouded that later in an eagle to throw the rest of us off the scent. And this is well documented in all of these different books, like Albert Pike and many others. This goes all the way back to the time of the Babylonian era, the land of Phoenicia. It's the Phoenicians who had the mythological bird, the phoenix. And the double-headed phoenix has evolved from that. It's always represented the royal bloodlines that have existed since the beginning of time. In my personal opinion, these royal bloodlines were the seed of the serpent referred to in the scripture. They had a special something that made their blood different, that gave them power and divine status all throughout the Dark Ages. And they were the ancestors of the great God King Nephilim that walked the planet before the flood. The same story that Atlantis is based on, the mythological world that lived before the ancient flood, where these demigods ruled the world. So we're just seeing that same mystery religion play out today. We've got the same world leaders. They're all Luciferians. They're worshiping the same images, the same icons, and they all understand the deep esoteric meaning of all this. Their goal is to bring back the ancient Atlantis. They all talk about Atlantis. That's what the New World Order is based on. They want to recreate the old world before the flood and allow the divine bloodlines come back and rule the world again. And this is obviously involves the Antichrist and the beast system and all that. They're looking at it through a different lens, of course. They think that it's a good thing, a positive thing, and that the rest of us are confused. And, you know, they think that Lucifer is the light bearer and so on and so forth. And there's plenty of evidence out there. I mean, we just looked at the New Age magazine that talked about, it confirmed the Lodge of Tranquility based on where Brother Aldrin did the ritual and put up the symbol on the moon. But these guys wear this, they wear their rings, and it's been documented that the vast majority of NASA astronauts and those running the show are all part of the Masonic religion. And guys like Jack Parsons were involved in a lot of the names. Basically, every mission patch and every name is full of occult Masonic symbolism, and perhaps none more than the Apollo missions. But as you look at the name of the missions and the crafts, they're all ancient gods. This represents paganism and worshiping of the ancient gods and the zodiac. We see everything from Roman numerals. We see complex sacred geometry. We have missions like Apollo, Gemini, Mercury, Atlantis, and then of course the ship itself is referred to as the Eagle. The eagle has landed on the moon, and if you study the origins of the eagle, that symbolism is really a phoenix in hiding. They've shrouded the phoenix with an eagle. The eagle has long been used to symbolize the crown chakra. It represents the mythological phoenix. Many mission patches feature things like the caduceus, serpents, eagles, and other spiritual symbology. Down here you can look at the Apollo 11 commemorate coin, and we see an image of Buzz Aldrin with the American flag, and he's carrying this plaque that has the Masonic symbol with the double-headed phoenix on it. And we can even look on the back and see the official symbols for NASA. So this is not something in hiding. This is all open in plain sight. Also, when you study the origins of the eagle, it's very clear that the original eagle was actually a phoenix, and all of the eagles henceforward have always been phoenixes. The phoenix is the mythological bird that destroys itself from inside out, and out of the ashes of its own death births the new. It's always been the symbol for the New World Order. The New World Order are going to destroy America and Western biblical principles from inside out, and after it's been destroyed from inside out, then they're going to take it over. The communists, the Russians and the Chinese and the communists are going to destroy it and take it over, and then they're going to birth their one world beast system out of the ashes of the old. Will birth the new. Now, two of the guys that helped put NASA on the map was Jack Parsons, Aleister Crowley's protege. He was a deep occultist. He was into all of the Greek and Egyptian mythology. And then also Werner von Braun, who was a Nazi, and they, of course, were into all of the theosophical movement and Egyptology as well. But basically, there's all kinds of hidden symbolism. We know that Apollo is a Greek and Roman god of the netherworld. He's the sun god. He is analogous to Horus in Egyptology, so they're the same person. Horus just becomes Apollo in Greek and Roman mythology. He's also the god of music, which is where the art of all of the different music and museums and all of the different arts come from. By the 5th century BCE, he had been nicknamed Apollo and Helios, and later became the Greek god Helios. He was the Titan god of the sun. The etymology of Apollo in the original Homeric Greek was Apollyon or Apollyon. That's very interesting because we see that in our Bible. In the book of Revelations, Apollyon is the destroyer angel who comes down and opens the bottomless pit. He descends down from space, attached to the planet Wormwood, and after Wormwood strikes the planet, the fallen angel Apollyon opens up the bottomless pit, where we see the beast descend from the pit, who goes into perdition, entering a human vessel to take over the person of the Antichrist, to fulfill that role. The word perdition is apoleia, the destruction of a vessel. So we're seeing a strong connection between all of this ancient mysticism involving the god Apollo and the book of Revelations. And so, coincidentally, CERN, the Hydrogen Collider, is also located underground, where there's this city that used to be called Apolliacum. This is where they believed that there was a gateway to the underworld of Apollo, and they would do rituals to honor Apollo. Also, Shiva, they have, and standing in front of CERN, the goddess Shiva, who is the god of destruction, who is the Hindu version of Apollo. So we see all these weird esoteric connections. Then we begin to realize that when you look at the Apollo mission, they named the mission Apollo after the god Apollo. That's why we see an image of him right here inside of the yellow. You see a picture of the god Apollo. And the A stands for Apollyon. That's what it's for. And it also makes a pyramid. And inside of the planet Venus, we see the god Apollo. Now we see 3 stars in the middle, which represent Orion's belt. And we know that because if you look at the other symbols of Orion, what do you see? You see a pyramid with Orion, which is, by the way, the planet Saturn with a ring around it. This has to do with all the Saturnian occultism. And then we see 3 stars. So the 3 stars are the 3 stars of Orion's belt. So now they're connecting the god Apollo with Orion. Why is that important? Because when you study Orion in Egyptology, the planet Orion in Sirius is what all of the Babylonian mystery religions and Masonic religions are based on. And they line up with the 3 stars. The 3 pyramids of Giza line up with the 3 stars of Orion. This is where the gods will descend down from space and emerge onto planet Earth. This is where they did it in the past. This is where they'll do it in the future. Remember, when you look up the word Nephilim in the Strong's Concordance, it has to do with the giant ones. And it's related to the giant star system in the sky, Orion. So as you can see, there's great esoteric and occult symbolism enshrouded throughout all of the Apollo missions and all of the NASA symbolism. Now, this is nothing new. This is nothing new at all. These guys have been writing their books for decades. We have people like Manly Free Hall. He talks about the ascended masters of the ancient wisdom, who are believed to be these spiritually enlightened beings who in past incarnations were ordinary humans, but they are able to undergo a series of spiritual transformations through initiation rituals of the occult, where they over time have received this cosmic Christ potential and Christ consciousness. This is the same thing as the Kundalini awakening through the Kundalini spirit that travels up the chakras. This was originally presented by Helena Blavatsky from The Secret Doctrine. This is a famous book that was channeled in the 1870s. This is what would give rise to the New Age movement. It would help bring along people like Aleister Crowley. Adolf Hitler was into The Secret Doctrine. It's the idea of these masters of the ancient wisdom who were adopted by people and at some point had connection with the Theosophical movement. Now, interestingly enough, these masters of the ancient wisdom are these big, tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, beautiful, Nordic-looking aliens. They're the same entities as the Nordics are over in the Western culture. So they're extraterrestrials. And we see all kinds of famous people. Alice Bailey, the one who started the United Nations Charter, she demonically channeled the externalization of the hierarchy. Annie Besant did all of her famous writings. Nicholas and Helena Roerich, the ones who helped put the Masonic symbol on the $1 bill and who were the personal guru of FDR and Henry Wallace, the 33rd and 32nd degree Freemasons who were running the planet during World War II. It's all connected. So when you look at Manly P. Hall's writings, he talks about the mythological phoenix and the secret teaching of all ages with the zodiac with the 6-pointed star inside of a circle, which is a hexagram. His writings talk about astrology and the ancient Egyptians who were really the Freemasons of the past. He refers to the pineal gland and how to connect with the spiritual entities and how to connect with those of Atlantis, which, by the way, shows a picture of the ancient god Apollo slaying the serpent, the dragon. This is all based on folklore of this ancient draconian reptilian race of god kings that the demigods had to destroy. Only I'm afraid it's not mythology. It's based and rooted in fact. Then we see Manly Hall's Secret Destiny of America, with an image of the all-seeing eye of Horus, the sun god, which makes the six-pointed star inside of a circle. And so their mysticism, their occultism, their symbolism, it's all been out there for people to see. It's just complicated, and you have to go through a lot of material to connect all the dots. You know, the Bible talks about that there's going to be a seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And then 3 chapters later in Genesis 6, we see that the angels mate with humans and they birth the Nephilim. Now, when you study the seraphim angels, they have reptilian features. In fact, a lot of people believe that where some of the dragon lore comes from is the flying seraphs. That when you look those words up in the Strong's Concordance, they're flying dragons. That some of these angels have reptilian features. That's why Lucifer is referred to as the serpent in the garden. And so when we hear about these ancient mythological stories of the demigods and the Greek gods, who, by the way, is just a retelling and a New Age packaging of what transpired before the flood. The question is, are these really myth? Because we have stories of the Oracle of Delphi, who is performing divination by receiving the Python spirit of divination. The Python spirit of divination is this serpent that worked through this oracle to give her prophecy. And then later the great god Apollo has to slay the dragon or the serpent, who is named Draco. That's the Greek for dragon. And we see all of these different renditions that go back thousands of years. Here is a literal temple to the temple of Apollo, where the great Oracle of Delphi, the female savant, the medium, would inhale mind-altering drugs, cannabis and different sorts like that, and then she would prophesy. And she was filled with this serpent spirit, this python spirit. And then later we see all of the different renditions of the Greek god Apollo having to destroy the dragon. Here we see Apollo destroying the dragon. Up here it's a serpent. Down here it's Apollo destroying the dragon, the fire-breathing dragon. And this has been going on for thousands of years, this folklore. But what if it's really based on truth? What if there really are? What if the seed of the serpent isn't a spiritual manifestation, but it's a literal manifestation? If you saw last week's lecture on Katy Perry and the song E.T., it shows a gray reptilian-looking entity coming down from outer space and becoming incarnate in flesh so that it can then manipulate human DNA. And she has to put on sunglasses to conceal her reptilian eyes. And so there's a lot of hidden symbolism in the god Apollo. So now let's just take a couple minutes and do a little history of the World War II era. We know that there was a huge event that happened after World War II called Operation Paperclip. This is the history of the secret program to bring Nazi scientists to America during and after World War II. So we have men like the man here in the middle, Werner von Braun. He was a high-level SS Nazi soldier and scientist. He's a nuclear physicist, and he's considered one of the fathers of modern rocket technology. He was a German aerospace engineer for the Nazis. And him and hundreds of other men in like fashion were granted immunity for what took place in World War II. They did not have to stand before the Nuremberg trials. They did not have to stand before the crimes against humanity that were committed at that time. They were granted full immunity as long as they would come over to America and continue to do their research and development that they were working on in World War II. And that's exactly what happened. They got rounded up, they got brought over to America, They're all getting paid six figures with great pensions and living like pigs in the fat house to continue the Nazi war machine, only now it's over here in Germany. In America. So guys like von Braun are the ones who started NASA, and there are other like-fashion Germans who started the secretive OSS, which would become the CIA. And there are other groups like Mengele and some of them who came over and became started the MK Ultra mind control program. And so there's all these different facets to American government and the departments of defense and so on and so forth that have Nazi origins and Nazi infiltrations. Of course, nobody tells you that unless you go and do a little background and do a little digging. But these guys were all the Nazis were into the occult. We know that Aleister Crowley started the Brotherhood of Saturn in the early 1900s. It was a German secret society based on magic and witchcraft and Saturn worship. And then, lo and behold, they end up calling the V2 rocket that Werner von Braun made the Saturn rocket. What are the odds? This is a pretty profound book by Richard Hoagland, The Dark Mission, The Secret History of NASA. It describes how NASA's really run from a cabal. That's the word they use to advertise the book. The cabal of Nazis, Masons, and black magicians, those in Crowley's Order of the Golden Dawn. And so, again, it's like an onion. It's ultimately one onion, but there's lots of layers to the onion. And so we're just looking at 3 or 4 layers right here. The Nazis are a layer. Same onion, different layer. The Masons are a second layer. Crowley's Order of the Golden Dawn and Thelema magic and black magic and witchcraft, a third layer. Later, NASA becomes a fourth layer. Same spirit working through all of it. And the spirit's goal is to prepare mankind for the future beast system. Now, each one of these men that we've discussed, they were just a stepping stone. They were just a cog in a giant wheel. I doubt that any specific one of them was necessarily involved in some big, huge underground covert secret. But the enemy has a way of working through humanity. These people are on a need-to-know basis. And so, as the enemy is inspiring Werner von Braun to make the Saturn V2 rocket, he's also inspiring the powers that be in America to bring about Operation Paperclip, to go and get those guys. He's also inspiring Joseph Mengele to do the DNA studies. He's also inspiring Jack Parsons, the occultist, to stabilize rocket fuel. These guys aren't as intelligent as you think they are. They're smart men, no doubt, off the backs of many before them. But at the end of the day, there's inspiration in some of the knowledge that the enemy is able to inspire ideas within humanity so that they will move forward with the enemy's agenda. Now, you hear different things about Werner von Braun. A lot of people greatly respected him, especially as he grew up through the ranks of NASA over here in America. They overlooked the fact that at one time he was a high-ranking SS Nazi. I don't know the particulars about him as far as his morality, but I can say this: it becomes evident after looking at him closely that he was very well informed about some of the things that were going on within the Nazi machine. He was privy to Nazi Germany's anti-gravity and propulsion vehicle technology, and that was being produced under the Third Reich. They had different prototypes, such as the Nazi Bell. If you look at the Nazi Bell, It obviously has an unusual appearance that's very reminiscent of a UFO. And the fact that it has anti-gravity propulsion technology means it doesn't have to shoot off down a runway and take off, but it can lift itself straight up, just like a UFO. Now, a lot of people have believed that the entire UFO movement has stemmed from the Nazis, and certainly the timing is there. I mean, we see the Roswell incident in 1947, and really we begin to really see the UFO movement blossom from there. Prior to that, we do hear a little bit about it in World War II with the Foo Fighters, which are all of the Air Force guys who are flying their planes who are identifying what they referred to as unidentified flying objects that they labeled as Foo Fighters. And so it's really during the World War II era that we see the birth of the UFO movement, if you will. Now, we can argue all day long why that is. Is it that the Nazis have been flying around in their anti-gravity aircraft and they're trying to propagate this extraterrestrial movement? Maybe that's part of it. The other aspect of it is understanding that the Nazi technology was obtained through dark occult rituals. When you study some of the rituals that these guys were doing, they were high-level satanic rituals involving psychics and mediums where they were channeling material from the other side. Now you may say, well, that sounds a bit far-fetched, but we've already seen this happen multiple times in previous studies. George Van Tassel was a New Age occultist who telepathically channeled the blueprints for the Integratron, one of the most amazing structures that we've ever seen, built on a Tesla coil and a split ring resonator. And so, make no mistake, those who are connected to the spirit realm are receiving spiritual downloads from the other side. It's highly intellectual, it's highly technological. I've said time and time again that the enemy is working through technology and he's helping propagate technology. And so, what seems to be happening from the 1930s and 40s on is two parallel circumstances. One is Jack Parsons, Ron Hubbard, Aleister Crowley, and guys like that are doing rituals like the Babylon working ritual, where they're claiming that they're shattering the boundaries of space and time, opening up portals, allowing extraterrestrials into our four-dimensional time space. And meanwhile, the Nazis are doing dark occult rituals and receiving the same intelligence from the same spiritual entities, and they're actually building nuts and bolts UFO aircraft over in Nazi Germany. So there's a person we need to take a look at, and it's this woman here on the top right called Carol Rosin. Now, she's a former space and missile defense consultant. She was close friends with von Braun near the end of his life. This woman has testified to the Senate and Congress that von Braun repeatedly warned her that NASA was nothing more than a giant conspiracy used to weaponize space and gain control and power over the planet. She claims that von Braun told her that all of the world governments were working in cahoots and that they were going to produce and use many scare tactics to produce what she referred to as fake enemies. And von Braun told her that these fake enemies would start off with the Russians. They would be the first scare tactic used against the American people. After that, it would be the war on terror, followed by the asteroid scare, where we need to weaponize space because of all the asteroids that are going to hit the planet. And then the last and final scare, according to von Braun, would be a fake alien invasion. So we're going to take a look at what she had to say. But as a side note, von Braun's tomb has Psalm 19 on it, where the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There's not a lot of information in the public record about von Braun in terms of his spirituality. So I can't say whether he was a follower of Christ or not. What we can say is that We know he was part of the Nazi military. Now he was, born in Germany. You can't control that. And he was working for his country. So that doesn't necessarily make him automatically evil. But as we're going to see in a minute, becomes quite clear that von Braun was well aware of all of the conspiracy and all of the different things going on. And although he did tell this woman at the end of his life, it doesn't seem evident that he ever really took a public stand to bring light to all of the darkness that he was enshrouded in. So we have to take that into consideration. So let's just quickly rip through Carol Rosin's testimony to Congress. When I was a corporate manager of Fairchild Industries from 74 to 77, I met the late Dr. Werner von Braun. At that time, von Braun was dying of cancer, but he assured me that he would live a few more years to tell me about the game that was being played. That game being the effort to weaponize space. That was the end game. And why? To control the Earth from space and space itself. See, it's about power and control. Von Braun had a history of working with weapons systems. He escaped from Germany to come to this country, and he became the vice president of Fairchild Industries when I had met him. Von Braun's purpose during the last years of his life, his dying years, was to educate the public and decision makers about why space-based weapons were dumb, dangerous, destabilizing, too costly, unnecessary, unworkable, and an undesirable idea, and about the alternatives that were available. On his deathbed, he educated me about those concepts and who the players were in the game. He gave me the responsibility, since he was dying, of continuing this effort to prevent the weaponization of outer space. When Werner von Braun was dying of cancer, he asked me to be his spokesperson, to appear on occasions when he was too ill to speak, and I did this. What was most interesting to me was the repetitive sentence that he said to me over and over again during the approximately 4 years that I had the opportunity to work with him. He said the strategy that was being used to educate the public and decision makers was to use scare tactics. That was how we identify an enemy. The strategy that von Braun taught me was that first, the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, in 1974, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, that they were commies. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would build the space-based weapons. The next enemy was the asteroids. Now at this point he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids. Against asteroids we're going to build space-based weapons. And the funniest one of all was what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final scare. And over and over and over during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving speeches for him, he would bring up the last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens, and all of it is a lie. She goes on to say that the last card that was being held was the extraterrestrial enemy card. The intensity with which he said that made me realize that he knew something that he was too afraid to mention. He was too afraid to talk about it. He would not tell me the details. I'm not sure that I would have absorbed them even if he told me the details or even believed him in 1974. But there was no question that that man knew and had a need to know, I found out later. So, according to her, Werner von Braun was hiding something. There was something that he was too afraid to talk about. Now, obviously that has to do with the end times deception. Whether it's all a big giant hoax, or whether he knew it was the fallen angels and the demons who are going to be displaying themselves as extraterrestrials. Unfortunately, we don't have that information. She goes on to say, there's no doubt in my mind that Werner von Braun knew about the extraterrestrial issue. He explained it to me, the reasons why weapons were going to be put in space, the enemies against whom we were going to build these weapons, and that all of it was a lie. He mentioned that extraterrestrials were going to be identified as the final enemy against whom we were going to build space-based weapons in 1974. The way he said it to me, there was no doubt in my mind that he knew something that he was too afraid to talk about. I've been tracking the space-based weapons for about 26 years. I've debated generals and congressional representatives. I've testified before the Congress and the Senate. I've met with people in over 100 countries, but I have not been able to identify who the people are who are making this space-based weapons system actually happen. I see the news. I see the administrative decisions being made. I know that they are all based on lies and greed. See, it's this shadow government. It's the deep state. It's kind of like a pyramid scheme. You've got all your lower level people, the leaders of the countries and the presidents and everything like that. And then you've got the bankers. And over time, it gets narrowed down, just like on the dollar bill. We see a 13-step pyramid. And then at the top of the pyramid is the all-seeing eye. That's the one who's running the show. And there's a direct shadow group underneath him. And then underneath them are more and more and more. They're all compartmentalized. They're all on a need-to-know basis. They're all just cogs in the wheel and don't have the full understanding of the grand picture. Only Satan and the fallen demonic hierarchy have that knowledge. She goes on to say, but I have yet to be able to identify who these people are. I've been tracking it for 26 years. I know that there are big secrets being kept, and I know that it's time the public and decision makers pay attention to the people who are now going to be disclosing the truth. Then we need to make some definite changes and build a system in space that will benefit every single person, the animals, and the environment. The technology is there. The solutions to Earth's urgent and long-term potential problems are there. I have a feeling that once we start studying this extraterrestrial issue, all of the questions are going to be answered that I've had for 26 years. But I have concluded that it's based on a few people making a lot of money and gaining power. It's about ego. It's not about our essence and who we really are on this planet and loving each other and being at peace and cooperating. It isn't about using technology to solve problems and heal people on the planet. It isn't about that. It's about a few people who really are playing an old, dangerous, costly game for their own pocketbooks and power struggle. That is all that it is. Now, I agree with her. It is the 1% of the 1% who are doing it for power and money, but it's bigger than that. There's a spiritual source behind it all. The enemy is using humanity, the technology, and everything to bring about the beast system. She goes on to say, in 1977, I was at a meeting in Fairchild Industries in a conference room called the War Room. In that room were a lot of charts on the walls with identified enemies. There were other more obscure names like Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi, but we were talking then about potential terrorists. No one had ever talked about this before, but this was the next stage after the Russians, against whom we were going to build these space-based weapons. They continued the conversation about how they were going to antagonize these enemies and that at some point there was going to be a war in the Gulf, a Gulf War. Now this is 1977, and they were talking about creating a war in the Gulf region where there was $25 billion in the space-based weapons program that had yet to be identified. It wasn't called the Strategic Defense Initiative, at least, not until 1983. This weapons system then had obviously been going on for some time, and I didn't know anything about it. See, they would have us believe that the oil embargoes and the wars and the things like that are all random events. When you go back in time, going all the way back as far as the Napoleonic Wars, who the Rothschilds and the Bank of England were financing, we see different characters who were involved in the formation of World War I, the development of World War II. We know wars like the Vietnam War were completely political. And so it shouldn't be shocking that 10, 20 years in advance, they're all already sitting around the boardroom, dicing up the planet, talking about what do you want to do with oil this year? Which wars do you want to have this year? How do you want to tax the people? How do you want to burden the planet? Because that's what their job is. That's who the cabal is. She goes on to say that there were $25 billion expended in the space-based weapons budget, that there was going to be a war in the Gulf stimulated and created so that they could then sell the next phase of weapons to the public and the decision makers. This war was going to be created so that they could dump the old weapons and create a whole new set of weapons. So I had to resign from that position. I could no longer work in that industry. So when I hear that there's a possible threat of extraterrestrials, and I look at the history of thousands of years of possible ET visitations, and I hear the disclosures of honest military intelligence industry people who've had experiences with UFOs, with crashes and landings, with live and dead bodies of extraterrestrial beings, I know it is a lie. And if I'm ever told that these are enemies against whom we have to build space-based weapon systems, based on my own personal experience of having worked in the military-industrial complex on weapon systems and military strategy, I'm going to know it's a lie. It is a lie. Not only will I not believe it, but I'm going to go out as loudly as I can and tell everybody to take a look for it. The ETs have not taken us away yet. We're still here after thousands of years of visits. If in fact they're still visiting us now and we have not been harmed, then we have to look at this as something that is not a hostile occurrence. It would be my hope and my intention to do everything I could to work with people who are working to communicate and would cooperate with these extraterrestrial beings. They're clearly not hostile. We are, and that is enough proof for me. So now it's interesting how she's kind of flipping the script. She's saying it's all a big lie, but she'd like to work with the people who are communicating with these extraterrestrial beings. So here she's insinuating that there really is something going on in that aspect. So as you can see, something doesn't add up here. I smell a rat somewhere. I mean, you have to look at these things through a spiritual lens. We know that Satan's been moving the goalpost down the field. That he's been working through all these different people. His goal is to create confusion. We have all these different concepts now. Is the UFO movement real? Are the Nazis the ones who created the Nazi bell and all the anti-gravity aircraft? Where did they get the technology? Is it spiritually derived? Is it all a big lie? Ultimately, at the end of the day, the bottom line is that the UFO movement is being used as an agenda. Whether it's real, whether it's fake, whether it's propagated, it's part of the last days deception. And I believe that this connects us back to 2 Thessalonians 2. We have to understand that there is going to be a worldwide, cosmological, astronomical event that transpires on such a huge level that every person on the planet is going to be privy to what's going on. Then we have to take into consideration that whatever this lie is, whatever this deception is, it's going to make everybody challenge their worldview, their ideology, and everything that they've ever learned. See, if they could somehow manifest an extraterrestrial invasion or whatever you want to call it, and we've yet to get into Project Bluebeam. Project Bluebeam is a fascinating concept about a fake extraterrestrial invasion where they're able to use the World Wide Web, all of the technology, all of the satellites, and they're able to display worldwide illusions that make it appear as if we're being invaded by extraterrestrials. It's a complicated subject, and we're going to do an entire lecture presentation on it here hopefully pretty soon. But if they could find a way to convince humanity that these extraterrestrial brothers and saviors are coming, then the people on the planet, including some of the Christian church, they're going to be really challenged to question what's written in the scripture. And it appears that there's going to be a large group of people who are going to reject the notion of the scriptures and what it says in the Bible, and they're going to accept this new paradigm. Now, it's pretty fascinating. We just saw last year that President Trump signed a new initiative into the legislation. Here we see the Office of the Press Secretary, Space Policy Directive number 4. Notice that it addresses the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Commerce, the Secretary of Labor, the Secretary of Transportation, the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, the National Intelligence Agency, the National Security Affairs, the Office of Science and Technology, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Administration of the National Aeronautics, as well as the Deputy Assistant to the President for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism. Subject matter is the establishment of a United States Space Force. So, we now have a 6th branch of the United States military. We have the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the National Guard, and now the United States Space Force is the 6th branch of the United States Armed Forces within the Department of the Air Force. So everything that Wernher von Braun told Carol Rosin as far as the goal is to make space-based weapons, we're seeing that that's coming to light 40 years later. That today we have a Space Force. Now, they don't tell us exactly why we have a Space Force. They suggest that it's to help combat other rogue nations who are also developing space forces. They haven't really got into a lot of details of the fact that this Space Force may be to protect us from the so-called alien invasion. But it's interesting how this keeps resurfacing. Here, just in June of 2020, a big headline news on Fox News, Trump signals that he has interesting details on the Roswell incident as Sun grills him about aliens. And so again, what I believe is taking place is what we refer to as soft disclosure. Soft disclosure is a manipulative tactic where you begin to soften the people up. You put the movies out, you put the cartoons out, you have all of the different ideology about the possibility of extraterrestrials and planets out there that these entities can come from, and you've got NASA and all the different organizations who are pumping the flesh and getting everybody ready for it, and then you slowly start disseminating the information. Now we have a Space Force, our own president's talking about aliens, and so it's not shocking that if somewhere down the stretch, 10, 20 years or whatever, all of a sudden the full disclosure is revealed and we're told that we are now in contact with these extraterrestrial entities. And so in my mind, it's kind of like adding up math. 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 2 = 4. And so you can go back and look at the fruit of all of this. We're dealing with Nazism. We're dealing with deep occultists and Satanists like Jack Parsons. We're dealing with a bunch of high-level 33-degree Freemasons who are part of secret societies. The entire NASA is shrouded in symbols of all of the missions, everything from the Apollo, etc. We're also given testimony from high-level people who said that all of this ET is being used as a cover to develop space-based weapons. And now today, we have the official 6th branch of the United States military known as the Space Force. What does all of these data points add up to? It adds up to the fact that somehow, some way, the extraterrestrial UFO movement is going to be used in the last days to bring about great deception. And unfortunately, this is a subject matter that is too taboo for the traditional church. The Church of Jesus Christ is not addressing these issues. And so when you bring up something like extraterrestrials to the common everyday Christian, they kind of look at you as if you are a heretic. And unfortunately, that's something that we need to see change. And so I hope that you'll all be praying about these matters, and as time goes on, we're going to be given more and more information from the Lord so that we can fully discern what's going on. And so on that note, guys, we're going to wrap it up. Godspeed, and we'll see you on the next one.